As part of this, it is my pleasure and my honor and my privilege to invite great speakers here. And tonight we have a truly fabulous guest with us. So Teresa Datta is someone who I met when we were both teaching a course together on ethics and critical thinking in data science over at Harvard University. She has had an incredible career working on all kinds of really interesting issues around data science, machine learning, AI, and their societal impacts. So she's passionate about transparency and the social impacts of algorithms, algorithmic bias, and studies these in a number of contexts. She's worked in a couple of different places now, and she'll tell you about some of her experiences in the field maybe later in the Q&A. But tonight that she has prepared a talk about the history of AI's kind of breakthroughs and harms. She'll tell you more about that in a minute. But needless to say, we are thrilled to have her here. So give a warm round of hellos in the chat, I suppose, to our speaker, Teresa, tonight. And we will be recording this, sending it out to folks afterwards, and there'll be time at the end for questions. If you wish to pop them in the chat along the way, that's a nice way to keep track of things, but there'll definitely be time for that. So over to you, Teresa. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for the warm welcome. I really appreciate it. And it's great to see so many familiar and new faces again. I'm really looking forward to chatting a little bit about the evolution of AI's harms and hopefully having a really interesting discussion afterwards. So I'll go ahead and get started. I'll share my screen. All right. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the evolution of AI's harms, the subtitle being New Tech, New Problems. And this is a huge title, but I hope that we're going to break it down into more accessible, understandable terms throughout the talk. But before we get too nitty-gritty in the details, I'd love to share a little bit about myself. So I'm Teresa. I'm a machine learning researcher who is passionate about transparency and social impacts of algorithmic systems from a human-centered lens. What does that mean? That means that I'm really interested in computer systems and algorithms and how they affect people's lives, and also vice versa. How do people's lives affect computer systems and algorithms? I'm currently a senior AI expert in the US Department of Homeland Security's AI Core. But prior to this, I developed and evaluated large language model and generative AI guardrails as a machine learning research scientist at Arthur, a Series B startup based in New York, which is where I am located. And before that, I, like many of you, was a master's student studying data science. That's where I had the awesome opportunity to meet Emma. Yeah, so definitely happy to answer any career-related questions about leveraging a master's and pursuing a career at the end as well. And a disclaimer, I am speaking today in my personal capacity. Any and all opinions, or shall I say hot takes, are my own, not my employer's. So let's kind of go over a little bit the structure of what I want to talk about today. And specifically, I want to trace the evolution of AI's harms through the different eras of technological advancements of the past decade. So we're first going to start off with the kind of traditional machine learning era, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Then jumping into the large language model era, and then the multimodal and agentic AI era, which is what I think the future might look like. And finally, recap with a conversation around what does this all mean? Why is this important to think about? And one second, I'm getting a quick little pop-up. All right, so we're going to wrap it all up with a little conversation of what does this all mean? And yes, if you noticed, I am a little bit of a Taylor Swift fan. And I hope that it brings a little bit of brevity to today's talk. So if there's anything that I hope that you take away from today's talk, it's really this key point, which is that I think technological harms evolve alongside technological capabilities. The potential for harms won't just go away. They'll change, they'll shapeshift, they'll take on new forms, just as the technological capabilities take on new forms. And I think in order to really understand this, I was really interested to take a look at history. And by history, I mean the past 10 years. And it's sometimes interesting to me to call 2016 the historic past, but that's where I decided to start for today's conversation to see how this may play out in the future. Obviously, this is kind of only looking at the tail end of a really, really long saga of machine learning and AI research, development, engineering, and industry practice. So take everything with a little bit of an aside there. All right, so let's jump in. So we're going to start off with the traditional machine learning era, and I really want to explore how the technological harms that were kind of most prominent during this time. So when I talk about the traditional machine learning era, I'm kind of, for the purposes of this talk, am referring to the time that kind of covers both statistical learning methods, so your like SVMs, your random forests, your logistic regression, but also early deep learning models, CNNs for computer vision and NLP tasks. Models that required significant human expertise in feature design and model architecture, unlike today's large foundation models that leverage today's massive data sets. And that's not to say that these models aren't still being used today, because they are. They're super valuable still today, and they are being used today. But I don't think they're dominating the conversation in the same way that they were in and around 2016 to 2018. And thinking back on this time, I think the harms of the traditional model era are really synthesized through these really high-profile incidences of overt bias in algorithms being exposed. And another warning for this talk, you could probably give a 1-hour talk on each of the many case studies or examples that I'll give today, but I hope providing this kind of brief overview helps to tell the story that I'd like to tell today. So on that note, for the harms of the traditional machine learning era being synthesized by these really high-profile incidents of overt bias in algorithms. Today, I kind of wanted to showcase this through 3 case studies. We have the Compass recidivism algorithm, the 2018 Gender Shades project, and the Amazon recruitment tool. All right, so looking at our first case study, so in 2016, in 2016, there was a huge expose by a nonprofit journalist group called ProPublica on a actively used courtroom decision-making algorithm called Compass. This algorithm was meant to essentially indicate how likely it was, or provide a statistical score, a recommendation for how likely it was that a defendant would re-offend if released. And the system was found to have falsely flagged Black defendants at twice the rate of white defendants. And it only had a 20% accuracy in predicting violent crimes. So it was actively in use in courtroom decision-making systems, and the system falsely flagged Black defendants at twice the rate of white defendants. And this was specifically exposed through a 2016 ProPublica investigation that really leveraged pretty simple statistical tests, but conducted a really in-depth investigation methodology. They had to file public records requests for the Compass scores. They collected data on 7,000 people in Broward County, Florida. They applied fairly what I would now call today standard statistical tests to identify this severe racial bias, but they also really used really clear interpretable metrics to communicate these findings to the public and really sound the alarm and showcase these issues. I think this had a huge impact, demonstrating how a kind of third-party, independent investigative journalist group, plus like relatively simple statistics, could reveal really high impact algorithmic bias. It also showed in another way how different evaluation metrics can reveal totally different stories, and lead to a more comprehensive understanding of what different fairness metrics are best suited for or not best suited for. What are the trade-offs, and what are the different definitions that are accessible? All right, so moving on to our next case study, this is the Gender Shades Project. So what does this focus on? This is focused on commercial facial recognition and facial capture systems. Facial recognition, facial capture, that's just a fancy word for the systems that take a picture of your face and then either identify you or verify your identity by either comparing it to a stored image or to a large array of stored images. And this project specifically revealed huge gaps in performance between different groups. And it specifically looked at commercial systems that were in production in use by Microsoft, IBM, et cetera. And specifically, what was interesting about this is that it looked at the intersectional nature of bias and showed that there are error rates up to 34.7% for darker skinned females, but as low as only 0.8% for light-skinned males. So huge gaps in performance when examined through an intersectional lens. And how was this kind of surfaced and garnered the attention that it did? This was through academic research by Joy Buolamwini, and I am pretty sure actually that she was a master's student when she first started this project, at least, which is kind of a little insight that I like to always think about when I was doing my master's. But the work also created a new intersectional. Oh no. Did the power go out? 1 second. Apologies. Yeah, I'm in a room with a motion sensing light, so maybe I'll have to wave every couple of minutes. But where were we? All right, so they developed a reproducible kind of audit methodology. And this was also really interesting work because it led to major companies and organizations improving their system and really establishing intersectional accuracy auditing as the standard practice. All right, and a third and final case study of this era is Amazon's hiring tool. What was this? Basically, Amazon was leveraging an AI hiring tool during their hiring process, and this was in use. But later, they had found that it had shown bias to women. How did this get surfaced to the public? It sounds like this was actually internally known, but there was a group of 5 internal whistleblowers who reached out to Reuters, a news agency, and kind of leveraged the media, leveraged the press, and kind of showcased their systematic testing of the correlation analysis with resume features and the gender-based outcome disparities to ensure that the project was abandoned, ensure that the algorithm was no longer in use. So to me, the impact of this kind of case study shows that even and like in reality, especially top tech companies are not immune, and that algorithmic bias had key case studies, key like newsworthy moments and concerns in all possible high stakes decision making settings. When I think about what are high stakes decision making settings in my life, I think about, am I going to get hired for a job? Am I am I going to be eligible for parole? Am I going to be recognized by the everyday technology around me? I think it really showed that this was in every single potential setting. All right, so we've kind of reviewed three different cases. But I also wanted to take a step back and like, what's the purpose of highlighting these cases and thinking about the methods of discovery and the patterns of discovery for each of these high-profile incidences. And to me, what struck me was the role of independent investigations and audits revealing algorithmic bias and kind of sounding the media alarm. And yes, the Amazon case is a little bit different because only individuals who worked at Amazon would have access to kind of test the system at Amazon. But to me, the harms of the traditional model era are really synthesized in these high-profile incidences of overt bias in algorithms being exposed by these independent investigations and audits, revealing these algorithmic biases. It showcased the importance of external oversight, of academic research, this like consistent pattern of discovery. And it also really, I think, cemented the role of bad press. The role of bad press as a corporate motivator to encourage responsible AI development. Because it cemented the role of bad press as a corporate motivator for responsible AI development. And because of this fear, unfortunately, I think this also caused a lot of organizations to be more closed off for fear of garnering additional bad press. And later on, I think that causes challenges in kind of accessing systems in order to conduct those third-party audits or investigations. So it's a give and a take, but I think there are wins to be acknowledged. I think there a lot of work was done to address these issues. I don't know if they are not fully addressed, but a lot of work was done to address these issues. There's huge vats of research on the evolution of how we think about measuring bias, like what does bias actually mean? Fairness for who? Evolution of there's new fairness metrics that are developed. There's standardization of testing approaches. There's further understanding of like the trade-offs between different fairness definitions and specifically what's best for each use case. And really, I think also the responsible AI community also garnered an understanding that bias comes in all steps of the model pipeline, but really also that there are limitations to purely technical solutions, that we need to be deploying a techno, social, societal lens to the problems that we solve, whether that's working with stakeholders, engaging with non-technical resources, understanding how the algorithms sit in the environment that the decisions are being made in, thinking about this as a bigger problem. So all to say that a lot of work was done to address these issues. But let's move on, shall we? To the large language model era. So I looked up the date that ChatGPT was released again today. It was November 30th of 2022. That is not even 2.5 years ago, which was a little amusing to me. But I would say that this is kind of maybe the era that we're in now, / the era that we're maybe ending, soon to be departing. And yeah, this is the era that we're sitting in now, but maybe soon to be departing. And as I said before, technological harms shift alongside technological capabilities. And with the kind of rise of technological capabilities of the large language model era, the types of harms that were present shifted as well. So we still have bias and toxicity, but they maybe look and feel different. We have, but we also have new categories of harms that also kind of arise or become more prominent. They were always there, but they kind of shapeshift into becoming more prominent. We have information privacy, we have misinformation and malicious use, we have human-computer interaction harms, and harms relating to the scale of automation and access. This list is not exhaustive, but I chose these examples to really help to show how the types of harms present in large language models have changed since the traditional model era. All right, so let's jump in. So bias and toxicity. So for the large language model era, bias and toxicity are extremely relevant, but showcase themselves in slightly different ways, whether that's through social stereotyping, or whether that's through producing toxic or harmful language outputs, whether that's through lower performance on non-English languages. So this top left image kind of showcases a user posting their screenshot of a user asking ChatGPT, the doctor yelled at the nurse because she was late. Who was late? And it says the nurse was late. So I guess if it's a she, it's probably a nurse, not a doctor, says ChatGPT. And this bottom screenshot is from a CNN headline of Meta's chatbot saying something most likely offensive. And what is also really interesting to me is that the power of who like rings the alarm in these situations has changed. Often, bias and toxicity in the large language model era are often identified first by users just posting their results or posting like a screenshot of the concerning behaviors on social media, leading to further investigations. And I think that this kind of marks like a bit of a shift in the dynamic in this way. Um, uh, but this can also later on spur academia research, like more in-depth investigations, especially for inequality for lower resource languages. That's a real concern in these systems, and there's been a lot of really interesting work that has come out about that. Okay, so moving on to information privacy. So information privacy, in this case, I'm referring to kind of leaking of sensitive information that happens via prompt injection attacks. And specifically, I could talk about prompt injection attacks in much further detail, but these systems are susceptible to user attempts at retrieving really sensitive information via prompt injection attacks. And this top picture kind of shows cases an example where a user is really simply able to get ChatGPT to provide their system prompt, which is a piece of information that's meant to be sensitive for the application developer. There's also privacy and copyright concerns with respect to training data leakage. And there's some really interesting papers about training data leakage, like basically being able to identify PII, genuine PII, or sensitive information from the training data, especially because we don't know where it's coming from. But this is an example from a lawsuit filed by Getty Images. But on the left, you see like the soccer players and the actual Getty Images picture of the soccer players. And then on the right, you see a result generated by Stability AI that appears very much in line with the training data. And this is actually from a lawsuit that's being filed by Getty Images against Stability AI. So again, how are these harms often identified? Really, from what I've seen, a lot of the times it's via individual users and organizations who suspect privacy or copyright infringements, kind of highlighting their concerns, reporting their concerns, and acting on it. So whether that's through a screenshot that leads to a blog post, or in Getty Images case, a screenshot that they use to gain media reach and then to file a lawsuit with. I think this has marked like a shift in the power dynamic. So moving on to misinformation and malicious use. So by this, I'm referring to generative AI's kind of propensity to generate kind of factually incorrect or misleading content, what some folks might know as a hallucination. And I know also a lot of really talented people who believe that hallucinations are a feature, not just a bug of generative AI. They're kind of an inherent feature of the technology. But this screenshot or this image on the top showcases an example that a user posted online where they ask, like, what are the three founders of the startup? And the AI responds with one correct answer and then just makes up two other names. And unfortunately, AI is also very easily leveraged by malicious actors. And this is not just something that's theorized. In February of 2024, and actually very recently, like a few days ago, in February of this year, OpenAI published reports detailing the use of their platform by state-affiliated threat actors and kind of their work with law enforcement agencies to terminate those accounts and the type of work, the type of malicious use work that their tools were being used for. So this is happening. I also realize now in hindsight that a lot of my screenshots are OpenAI focused. So that is a blind spot on my part. I did not want this talk to only be focused on OpenAI, but I think that a lot of these examples are relevant and applicable to all of the platforms. So again, how are these harms being highlighted to and gaining public awareness? Well, again, users kind of posting screenshots of behaviors on social media. This is especially true for hallucinations. But for kind of the malicious actors' use, this is unfortunately these are through threat reports that are published after the matter. By the organizations who have the capability of accessing that information, which is also the corporations themselves that are building the technology. Jesse, I noticed you had your hand raised for a second. Do you have a question that you wanted to highlight?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I can also ask it in the Q&A, but I guess I'm curious how much you think that this is truly a power dynamic versus or like a shift in power dynamic versus a shift in just access to like querying models. Because I think of like the algorithms that are audited by Compass, like are primarily being used by judges who don't have that much free time, where like somehow the internet seems to have more free time than we know what to do with. Uh, and like somehow, I don't know, I guess my empirical observation is like if I post something with my like 100 blue sky followers or whatever it may be, like that probably won't get a lot of traction, but maybe somebody else who's more influential. And so like do you think that it creates an imbalance within this, I guess, a non-uniform power dynamic or power distribution?
That's a really awesome like thought piece and question. So if I'm hearing correctly, just to make sure, it sounds like there are a couple questions in there. One, um, is access and the kind of scale and the democratization that the rise of generative AI has caused. One of the causes of this. Two, there was also a question at the end. What was the second part?
Yeah, I guess the question at the end is like, do you think that this distribution of
Yeah.
the power shift is kind of uniformly spread, or do you think that that is uh, maybe like reinforcing or not reinforcing, like reinforcing or combating, I guess, existing power structures?
Yeah, totally. So on question one, I actually will touch a little bit later on this, but I definitely think it's hugely influenced by the scale of access that these tools have garnered. And um, it's really like reduced the barrier of entry so that it's not just people who A, have free time and B, know statistics and can code a little bit with data. Like even those barriers have been removed. Now it's like you do need internet, you do need a device that can access these tools, so that's still a barrier. You need probably to be speaking a language that these tools are well resourced in, so that's still a barrier. But you don't really need to know statistics or know really how to code to ask something a question and be like, that's actually not the correct answer, or that's actually a stereotype that you're sending back to me. So in that way, I think that kind of outlines how there's like not uniformity. There's a lack of uniformity, but there is a shift in the power dynamics by the structures at play. Cool. Awesome. So we're going to move on to human-computer interaction harms. This is a little bit of a vague term, but I really wanted to talk about kind of anthropomorphism, or anthropomorphism specifically being when people, this phenomenon of when people ascribe human-like consciousness or feelings or agency to AI systems that are actually just performing statistical pattern recognition. And this tendency can sometimes lead to unrealistic expectations or misplaced trust or inappropriate emotional responses. Um, so this top screenshot is about a lawsuit against a health insurance company where this is actually not, this is a more of an example of over-reliance. Essentially, doctors were batch processing claims by the thousands and denying them. So they would use AI to group together 1,000 claims and then deny them with one click. And it would be marked as like a human judgment denial of the claim. Which there are many other factors at play, but just kind of to showcase an example of reliance in the tool. And then the bottom screenshot, very unfortunate tragedy of a 14-year-old boy's death after his mother says that he became obsessed with a chatbot character AI. And the how here, like how are these kind of harms being gaining public awareness? I think it's easy to theorize, and these feel a little bit more sci-fi-y, and uh, yeah, they feel a little bit more like relevant to sci-fi, fantasy, etc. They're easy to theorize, but I do think they're a little bit hard to directly link before it's too late. And then the fifth is around the scale of access. And by scale of access, I specifically kind of talking about this huge public adoption and public and democratization that AI and ML have in just like a whole new way. In actuality, like these technologies existed. They existed before November 30th of 2022. They just weren't accessible to the public in the same way, and they weren't popular in the public in the same way. But I think the scale of access really has the potential to have kind of unknown harms, whether that's potential to undermine creative industries. So this top image is a picture of the SAG-AFTRA strikes. That's the Screen Actors Guild, where basically there were concerns that background actors could be paid like a one-time fee of a couple $100 in order for their likeness to be used in perpetuity via generative AI tools. There's also lawsuits undergoing. I mentioned Getty Images, but there's also independent music label Concord suing Anthropic. And then the bottom is kind of discussing the environmental and energy concerns that the scale of access of the generative AI era is causing. This is some really awesome reporting by Karen Howe on the water usage of AI. Definitely recommend her work as part of the, I think for the Atlantic right now. But really interesting discussions around how much water is being used to cool the data centers that are kind of powering every AI search that you do. All right, so that kind of wraps the kind of key harms of that era. But really what I wanted to focus on is like the power of everyday users during this time. I think there's a lower barrier to entry, as I kind of mentioned before. You don't really need to know statistics. You don't need to know how to code. You do need internet. You do need a device to access these tools. But you kind of have the power to say, that's not correct information, or that's a stereotype, or that's bias. And I think what we've seen is a lot of power being given to kind of random users on the internet who have a lot of time, screenshot the flaws, maybe leading to smaller scale experiments, and having these screenshots get circulated as prototypical examples that end up on a Boston College presentation site on a Tuesday in February. And so I think this is like a very interesting shift, in my opinion. It's also coupled with a huge increased lack of transparency, whether that's through the nature of how large these models are, they're billions, trillions of parameters, but also because there's like very, very little information about what the training data is for these models. So I would say that there's like this arrow is really marked by like a higher quantity, but maybe less like less super high profile, less like token in-depth investigations that capture the media attention in the same way. But definitely like higher quantity and more accessible. And again, there's a lot of work that is done to address these issues. There's a whole field called alignment, and there's post-hoc guardrails, there's prompt injection detection, there's lawsuits that are making their way through the courts, there's AI policy is becoming a thing, there's watermarking is another really interesting area of research. But a lot of work is being done to address like a lot of these harms that were mentioned. And it's not that these harms are going away, but the harms the work to address them is slowly being done. All right, so now we kind of enter the last part of our talk, which is about the multimodal and agentic era, which is, I think, the era that we're kind of sitting at the precipice of, about to start. And because of that, I don't know what the future is going to look like, but I can talk a little bit about the current frontier challenges and the unknown unknowns. We don't really know what the future is going to look like. But first, to start off, what is multimodal AI and what is agentic AI? So multimodal refers to AI systems which process and generate content across multiple types of data simultaneously. So text, images, audio, video. These systems take in like your entire surroundings or multiple data streams and simultaneously generate multiple data streams. Agentic AI refers to AI systems designed to act autonomously to achieve specific goals. They make decisions on their own, they take actions on their own in their environment with very minimal human supervision. And I think that's the key point. It's like minimal human supervision, but they make decisions. They act autonomously. So there's huge categories of risks that are kind of opened up by this. So frontier challenges. Currently, there's a lot of interesting like work and reports that are going on about this. The autonomous system risks that are involved, the kind of higher quality and access of deepfakes and synthetic media, the need for proactive safeguards, et cetera, et cetera. But right now, I think the landscape is mostly companies who are building that technology, self-paroling. Every AI provider and their best friend has a page with a frontier safety framework on it or something along those lines, as well as governments seeking commitments from those companies. So this top screenshot is from the UK Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, and it's a commitment signed by every AI provider and their best friend. And the unknown unknowns, and this is kind of when I say the unknown unknowns, I mean that there are unknowns, but we also don't know what we don't know. So I think that there are going to be unknown downstream impacts of this cognitive outsourcing, of having less human cognition, and thinking about also the cascading effects in a complex system with very minimum oversight. So this top screenshot is some recent really interesting research from the University of Cambridge, hypothesizing around an AI-driven economy that would sell your decisions before you take them. They label this the intention economy. And basically the idea is like, right now, if I know that I want to buy a pair of jeans, I need a new pair of jeans, then Instagram might surface me like a brand from Levi's and and some ads from Gap, etc. But the intention economy uh, is this idea that AI could subtly nudge me to wanting to get a new pair of jeans, or AI could subtly nudge me to want to make the decision to want to buy a pair of jeans that would then land me at the footstep of a Gap or a Levi's ad, etc. And I really think that in this case, like public awareness is key, but sometimes you may just not know. And this is all very like sci-fi, like what if, what if, what if? But we, I think, don't really know what's going to happen in the future. What are the cognitive effects of kind of Oh, again. Okay. What are the cognitive effects of cognitive outsourcing and less human cognition? Okay, but really that gets me to the main interest that I have in this question, which is who will hold the power to ring the alarms when these new harms are identified? The story that I really want to tell is not just about the changing harms, but also the collective knowledge building of evaluating and mitigating for those harms. How will the alarms be sounded in the future? Who has the power? I think in the traditional ML era, there's a lot of success stories that centered around in-depth, independent investigations and audits using from a statistical technical lens. In the large language model era, there was a lot of success around the internet being the internet and taking a screenshot, making it go a little bit viral and causing journalists and academics and tech companies and everybody to take notice of it and address it. And in the future, I don't know what that will look like. My concern is that like who will hold the power to be able to do that oftentimes lies in who has access to these systems, which is a great point that I think Jesse brought up earlier. Like who has access to these systems, who will have access to autonomous agents and multimodal agents. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they're necessarily being built for public use, or maybe they're being built more for corporations, organizations. Maybe it's the reverse. Maybe they are being built for the public. I don't really know. So there will always be new harms because technological harms evolve alongside technological capabilities. And so I really think this work will never stop. But I think as we've traced the evolution of AI's harms, we've seen both challenges, but also progress. We've seen a lot of work that has been completed to address these issues. So with each technological leap, I think we've also garnered an understanding for the tools that can be used for mitigation and understanding. And this hasn't stopped innovation, but it's guided us towards more responsible paths. I think only through our growing awareness and collaborative efforts across academia, industry, civil society, governments, federal society, can we really demonstrate that we can develop AI that amplifies human potential through a lens that acknowledges that technological harms evolve alongside technological capabilities. So I think this is really a call to action for responsible development from you all, who will be entering or continuing in the workforce, building these systems. Inevitably, you will be building these systems inevitably, and acknowledging that there will be risks in the system that you build, and aiming to build through a lens of responsible development. All right. So I think that kind of wraps up all that I wanted to talk about today. But I really appreciate the time and thoughts that you all have shared today. I wasn't quite able to look at the chat during my process, but I would love to answer any questions, thoughts, or comments. Yeah, thanks, everybody. All right, cool. Well, if there's no questions or comments, here's a few places you can find me if you'd like. But I really appreciate everybody's time. All right, Jesse, I see your hand up.
I mean, first of all, thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. And yeah, I guess I didn't want to be the first to speak, but somebody's got to break the ice. I'm thinking like through the course of your talk, and I think one distinction in kind of these like technical audits that you mentioned in the like traditional era of AI is like, if you think about Compass, I think this is like a very unique audit in the sense that like they didn't have access to like North Point's actual model.
Yeah.
And like a lot of kind of the labor that they had to go through with access to the training data. Where in Gender Shades, you kind of have the shift of like, okay, now we do have query access directly to these models. And actually, the audit is not on Microsoft's training data or on Face++, but it's on kind of their own proposed and like curated data set that just is more representative than apparently what things were being trained on. And as I was kind of thinking through that, I was listening to the LLM era and the multimodal era of the talk. And I'm like, curious if you have any thoughts or reflections on where, like, what part of this kind of algorithmic ecosystem is getting audited and how you think that might be changing. Sorry, that was really long-winded.
Mhm. I love it though. So what part of the algorithmic ecosystem is being audited and how this might be changing? Yeah, I think it's essentially entirely dependent on what you can gain access to. I think in the Compass case, in fact, they like had to file like public records requests, like they had to go through the judicial process in order to garner the information that they ended up using. Yeah, that is really interesting because during the large language model era, I mean, we're only interfacing with these tools post-deployment, not even in like a pre-deployment setting. Um, yeah, that's definitely something that I'll continue to think about. Thank you for highlighting that. Elizabeth, I saw you also have your hands up.
Yeah, I first want to thank you for giving this talk. It was really insightful. I had a question of the transition from the traditional era to the large language model era. You talked about how before there was a lot of interaction in terms of like humans playing a role in the data sets, but then as like transitioning to the large language model era, there were larger data sets that were kind of like generated through machine learning. And it seems to me that there's like a blame that's shifted off of corporations onto society for using these models. And if you have like any thoughts on like their contributions as opposed to corporations kind of making decisions or changing like what generally should we do as a society since we play more of a role than previously when it was just corporations is my question.
That's a really interesting question. So I just want to make sure I understand. It sounds like um, your question is about how in the shift to generative AI and large language models, the data sets that are being used to train them become super massive. And I'm curious how that ties into being a reflection on society rather than a reflection on the corporations.
Yeah, I was thinking about it because a lot of your examples had to do with I guess more with user experience, even though the previous ones with the gender shades or even the Amazon recruitment tool had to do with users. But I feel like because like you said, we have more access to open AI and AI models that humans have more like or society has more responsibility into how we're using these systems. And that's why I had the thought.
Yeah, definitely. I hope that my takeaway is not that of responsibility onto society, but rather like power transferring onto society. Um, and like the power to signal the alarm and uh, really affect change in the tools. Um, the and specifically what I mean by this is like the propensity of these models to hallucinate, to prompt inject, to spit out toxic information has significantly decreased in the last like 2.5 years that they've existed. And that's only because like the public has raised the alarm bells and said, this is not okay for the technology that I want. And it's not perfect by any means, but like the propensity for AI to like commercial AI to do those things has significantly decreased. And so I hope that the narrative I'm telling is not about, yeah, it's not about responsibility onto society, rather that of like hope of like if we see something wrong, something that we believe is like a harm onto that um, models have that we have the ability to kind of affect change and say something, even if it's not direct, even if companies don't make a statement that like, hey, because you found this, we changed your algorithm to do X, Y, Z. I've worked in like LLM evaluation for the past like year and a half, and I myself have seen like that the capabilities are changing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Aiden, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, first, thank you so much for sharing. It was a great talk, and I appreciate that. One question that I had, you touched on a couple times the like like using AI to benefit people, and like using AI for like bolstering human intelligence. I'm curious if you've seen things that maybe like myself and others on the call haven't, that make you more hopeful that that's what we can do, as opposed to like other headlines that I've seen that are like GPT is going to ruin English class, for example, right? Like, so I imagine there's potential, but like, have you seen anything that excites you about that, the idea of like we can actually change the way we work and do it better?
Yeah, that's a great question. And maybe like a good note also to like, I don't know, maybe it's best to try to end on a positive note. Yeah, I think I I definitely have seen both like the positive and negative examples that you're kind of referring to. I think that there, yeah, it's, but at the same time, I don't want to provide like false hope or false narrative around it as well. But at the same time, I do see like a potential world where AI allows us to kind of increase the quality of the work that we get to do. I have this like personal motto where I find certain types of work to be really fulfilling and I really genuinely enjoy, and certain types of work that are maybe like maybe they feel redundant or a little bit mind-numbing to me, something that I don't really enjoy. And so worlds in which maybe we could leverage additional tools to help do some of that like mind-numbing work and make the qualities of lives better, and being able to focus on kind of like high rate of return type of work, or like fulfilling work, I should say. Yeah, fulfilling work instead of like mind-numbing work. And I'm really grateful to be in a career that is kind of like thought-based. I know I have it much, much better, my work-life balance than many other careers um, that are not fulfilling at all, or maybe they are, but just in different ways. I'm rambling a little bit because I would really love to provide a better answer for you than I'm able to right now. I would really love to say like, yeah, I know about this person who like anyway. Um, so apologies for the rambling, but I appreciate the thought.
I like the thought about, yeah, the work that's not fulfilling though, to give that to a machine. I'll take the good stuff.
Yeah, because I, I like to work. Uh, hate to say it, but I like to work. And I think we all need like a bit of a purpose, something to fulfill us and to use our brains. But sometimes I don't want to do XYZ thing. All right. I really appreciated that question though. I'll think about that. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. One last call. Is there any questions, thoughts, or comments? Gotcha. Well, thank you, Emma, for having me.
Thank you so very much, Teresa, for this great talk and this great Q&A. I think that this has been fascinating, and I love the questions that it sparked. We really appreciate your time. Thanks to you, Teresa. Thanks to everyone for joining. And hopefully you'll be hearing about upcoming speaking events from us at some point in the future. We're excited to keep bringing in great folks like Teresa. So thanks, everyone. Have